Hey everyone, this video is going to overview how to analyze voice, which is a task that you are going to need to complete this week, and therefore this will give you some step-by-step tools that you can use to complete the task successfully. So, when you analyze voice, you are looking at a couple different things. You're looking at the diction, syntax, imagery, and other literary devices used by the voice. These are the things that create the voice, or in other words, the author's personality. So remember, when the author writes, they're putting on a persona. Sometimes the author is writing from the author's point of view. That's very true, for instance, with memoirs. The author is writing about their own life and therefore are going to use their natural voice. Unless, of course, they want people to see them in a certain light that isn't necessarily genuine, and then even in a memoir, the author will put on a persona. However, with most writing, especially most fiction writing, authors create a persona that's not supposed to be themselves. That's why when we talk about fiction, we don't say the author says, we say the narrator says, because the author's persona is the narrator. The narrator is the voice that they've created for their writing. Therefore, when we talk about voice, we're talking about the voice of a narrator. And that narrative voice can be in first person, second person, or third person, and all the kind of sub-sections of those point of views. Now, when we're looking for diction, syntax, imagery, and other literary devices, they will give us the kind of pieces of proof that we need in order to confidently say what the voice is and the purpose of that voice. So when you analyze, I want you to do what I'm about to demonstrate. So here we have two voices. We have a voice of Carrie Underwood in Cry Pretty, and we have the voice of Kanye West in Yikes. And I've just taken, I believe, 8 lines from the beginning of each song. So in both of these songs, the singers and writers are creating a persona that they want their readers to perceive in order to best understand their message. So let's take a look first off at the diction that's in each of these songs. So over in Cry Pretty, we have a ton of diction to look at. So first we have just and girl. So those two diction words, especially when used together, creates this tone of just a common person and an innocent person. Just, common, girl, innocent. Then when we move on to the next line and we have heart and world, we get this sense of emotion in this persona. It's an emotional persona. They're vulnerable. They're opening up to the entire world. Also, when we see diction like not usually and pretty good, this creates a sense of insecurity. This persona is insecure and unsure of what they're saying, because we have this very wishy-washy language where they don't want to make a clear statement. They're kind of wavering and trying not to create any friction or tension. Then we have this word composure. Now, composure is a little bit of a more elevated word. It's not simple language. It's not a word that necessarily everyone's going to know, and therefore it elevates the persona's voice. Next, we have the word apologize. Now, using the word apologize, that creates this tone of being gentle and kind and thoughtful. So that continues to develop this persona as someone who is vulnerable and is seeking something from the reader, or in this case, the audience. Next, we have falling. We have emotions next, which kind of supports this idea of apologize. And then we have falling, which creates this sense of trouble. This persona is in trouble and needs help. And again, that further emphasizes this vulnerability. And we have this word human, which also reminds us that this persona is relatable. She's a human, you're a human, we're all humans, and therefore we can understand each other and have empathy. And then we have hide, fight, and truth. And this makes the last line, the diction's a little bit inspirational. It speaks of trouble, but it also has a slight positive ending of that there's truth in this trouble, and therefore we get a sense from this persona that they're dealing with big things and trying to get us to understand those big things. Alright, now let's go and look at the contrasting diction in Yikes. So here we have the word menacing and frightening. So that diction is much more intense, and it creates a sense of danger and chaos. It's not as gentle as the diction that we see in the previous song. Also, we have the word scare, which adds to that sense of danger and trouble. What's interesting is that we get the sense of trouble through the word falling over here, but the sense of trouble here is much more intense and it creates kind of, as I said before, a much more chaotic feeling in the speaker's persona. However, we also have this word myself, which creates a sense of introspection, which both songs have in common. They're both introspective songs speaking about emotional states. However, the emotional states are what differs between the two personas being created. Then we have the word tweakin', and then we also have the 2CB, TBD, DMC, and DMT. These slangs create kind of this cool persona. It creates a kind of a cool, carefree, but also kind of in your face, because it's still that aggressive language tone for the persona. And again, this repetition of the diction again creates that confrontational tone of the persona where they are getting in your face. And then at the end, similarly, it says died and lived. And again, this is an inspirational line. Again, we're dealing with big things. Just like in this song, we have hide, fight, and truth, big concepts. Here again, we're dealing with big concepts of dying and living. So we have similarities in the diction, but we also have distinct differences in the diction that are creating different personas. So next, let's move on to analyzing the syntax. So with the syntax, we're going to speed things up a little. With diction, you got a lot of examples, but with syntax, you just have to find a couple to figure out the same kind of things that you can figure out with diction. So here I want to look at the fact that Carrie Underwood's the persona that she's building in this song uses a lot of conjunctions, such as so, but, and. And what that does is it builds each line on top of each other so that it seems like long sentences that just keep going and going and going. And it creates this sense that she's trying to explain herself. So this, but this, and this. She's trying to explain something important to her, and that further emphasizes this persona of kind of a vulnerable persona that's seeking out something in the audience. Now, when we look over here in Yikes, each line is its own sentence. Even though the punctuation here doesn't suggest that, if you read it, it is sentence, 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 sentence. And we can see it more clearly here, sentence, 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 sentence. Those, each line being its own distinct sentence creates more of a tone of certainty and defiance. There's no questions here, even though ironically this is the one using the question marks. It's a much more defiant form of syntax and a much more certain form of syntax. So next next would come imagery. Neither of these use a lot of imagery words, so we're going to skip that one. In your analysis of voices in your pieces, if you see imagery words, you need to analyze that. If you don't see imagery words, you can skip it. All right, so what we are going to do next are the literary devices because they do exist in here. So for instance, over here we see for worse are for better. And this is an inversion of a phrase we're familiar with, for better are for worse. Now the fact that it's been flipped creates a more positive tone where we end on the word better. And therefore we're like, oh, things are getting better. So this inversion creates a positive tone. When we look over here, in Yikes, there's repetition of the lines that emphasize menacing and frightening, menacing and frightening, and I scare myself, myself, I scare myself, myself. And so this repetition creates a sense of insecurity and self-destruction. So we can say that this has a much more negative tone than this one, even though they're both seeking out approval. Again, if we look over here, we see that she's apologizing. So she's seeking out kind of forgiveness, but what's interesting is that all of the things she says are statements. Therefore, while she's seeking out forgiveness and understanding, she's still telling people what is going on. Over here in Yikes, we go to these rhetorical questions in which the persona imagines what other people are saying about him, but but then also using the huh, it creates this sense of aggressiveness where he's saying, huh, is that what you said? Huh, is that what you said? And therefore, while she's seeking out acceptance, we don't get the sense that acceptance is what the persona is seeking here. So with these things in mind, you have to ask yourself, how is the author presenting themselves to the reader? So for Carrie Underwood's persona in her song, she's presenting a character that's vulnerable and emotional and who's trying to make people understand her behavior so that they'll forgive her for things that she has done. However, for Kanye West's persona in his song, he's more defiant and chaotic, but interestingly, also seeking out some kind of confirmation. There's still a sense of insecurity and seeking understanding, but the differences between the persona is that the second persona in Kanye West's song, the character is aggressive and does not ask for an apology, and therefore seems much more defensive in this seeking of forgiveness, where at times we might even forget that forgiveness and insecurity is what is occurring. Now, when we look at these point of views, both of them are in first person. But what's interesting is that they differ in how close and distant they are. However, both of them are very familiar. So, let me get all my things up there. So third person is not exactly what we're looking at because it doesn't apply to this. But looking at first person, both of them are very familiar, for instance, which isn't on here. But the idea is that they're talking about emotions pretty openly, so that's going to give us a sense of familiarity. Now with the close and distance, I would argue that Carrie Underwood's persona is at a medium distance. She talks to the reader you, she talks about the world, she talks about humanity. That pulls the scope out a little so that we can kind of see this bigger picture. But then with Kanye West's character in his song, the distance is much closer and in your face, which is why it creates kind of a claustrophobic, aggressive sense with this questioning. It kind of puts itself into the audience's face and is a lot closer in scope. If you imagine this being filmed, it's going to be right up in their faces as opposed to Cry Pretty, in which the scope's going to be pulled out and kind of scanning over the landscape. So both of these are very familiar, but this one would probably be medial, while this one would be quite close. And creates kind of the difference in aggressiveness. Alright, so what is the purpose of this persona? Well, I will leave that for you to think about. What is the purpose in Carrie Underwood's Cry Pretty? What is it that she wants for her audience to know and understand? And similarly, what is Kanye West's purpose in his song, Yikes? What is it that he wants his audience to understand? So I'll leave you with those questions as you ponder, and then you can go ahead and complete your own analyses of your voice excerpts. Go for it.